right, scrunch everything up. Really tight. And on the count of 5, relax. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. Shake your hands out. Move your shoulders a little bit. Move your head gently from side to side. Good. Now, as long as your hands are up here around your jaw area, will you open your jaw and put your fingers up here by your ears? So the one finger is in front of your ear and one is under and behind your earlobe. You should feel 2 holes in your head. Did you know you had those? Those holes, if you can feel them, that's where your jawbone connects to your skull. When we talk about jaw tension, when we talk about space in the mouth, we often say drop your jaw, and we think chin, we think this. But the jawbone is all of this, and tension can lodge anywhere in that space. So now that your fingers have found those holes, take your hands and wrap them around the jaw and just massage. Just massage it around. Tension is the enemy of good singing. You don't want any tension. Massage all of that out. Good. One more stretch and yawn. That shouldn't be too hard. At 9 a.m. Good. Now with that sense of space, of lightness, no tension, you're going to sing nu, oh, nu. With an N as in love thy neighbor. U and O. Ready and read. Good. Say nu. Like Julia Child, say nu. Now like you're from Minnesota, say no. About the same place in your mouth. Ooh, oh. Ooh, oh. Yeah, see if you can keep them in that same place even as you sing. Ready? Again. That's beautiful. Very good. Gives you more potential energy. And then when you throw the football leaves your hand here. Your hand continues to move, first of all because of inertia, and secondly because that energy helps continue to spin the ball forward, gives a little more push. So this time, can you do the siren again? You're going to go and inhale as you bring your hand back to throw the pass. Go Bucks. And then you're going to follow through as you sigh, as you siren down. Okay, here we go. Breathe in. Yeah, I like that a lot. E second vowel, can it be a little bit darker? Bring the corners of the mouth in and just make that second vowel a little less bright. Ready, and go. We say diaphragmatic breathing, that's a misnomer, right? The diaphragm doesn't actually breathe. What happens is, as your lungs expand when you're breathing properly, they fill from the bottom up like a gas tank. And when they fill, the diaphragm moves down because the lungs are expanding and helping to push it down. And it pushes all the other organs down and out. So that's what we want. We want that sort of a low breath. It's not pretty, but it's not a beauty contest. So deep breath in and exhale. Again, in, and exhale. Same thing again, but silent. In, exhale. Now you're going to breathe in and go. Ready? Breathe. Good. Say ka, ki, ko. Good. Now you're going to sing right here. Ka, ki, ko. And the important thing is the breath and the consonant. We could care less about the vowel. It's a throwaway sound. Okay, try it. Ready? Breathe. Yeah, on this side of that. It's high, and the goal is, let's start a little lower. Let's start here. Ready? Breathe. Side to side as you go up this time. So, ka-ki-ko, lots of K, not worrying about the vowel. And we're just going to move our head very gently from side to side. If you can't do that without getting dizzy or falling down, don't. But if you can, just a real gentle motion. Here we go. Ready? Breathe. Ka-ki-ko, 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 ka-ki-ko. When you move your head from side to side, you prevented yourself from creating any throat tension. You couldn't bear down with these muscles because you were too busy using other muscles in the neck to gently move the head. So the arytenoids, the arytenoids, all those things that manipulate the vocal folds couldn't do that. Tension is the enemy of good singing. Good. Let me hear the basses and altos. Sopranos and tenors, you can do this too until it gets too low, in which case drop it. And you're just going to sing knee, like the thing that connects your lower leg to your thigh. Here we go. Breathe. Good. Can you darken the tone by rounding your lips? Good. Gentlemen. Yeah, just the guys. Head voice. Julia, child. Good. Now, gentlemen, you're going to do this. You're going to say the word tweet. P-W-E-E-P. Tweet. Say it. Tweet. Say it with a puff of air in the cheeks before you start. Tweet. 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 Yeah, good. Now, it's like this. Listen. Listen and observe. Tweet. Very light, it's very breathy. We're not worried about sounding masculine. We're not worried about a big sound. breath support, air. Let's try. Ready? Breathe. Strangely no pants. You know what I'm talking about? Poo. That's what you're going to do. Ready? Breathe. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Hold it. I should have said like that. Ready? And breathe. Yeah, that's pretty good. You take one hand, and instead of a football this time, I want you to throw a paper airplane. So you're going to go and let the release of the airplane be the constant sound. So breath in. That's good. Really hooty, really spinny like an owl. Ready? Again. Good. Good. Here. We'll do one more, then we'll slide down by half step. Good. Zing-a-mama, zing. Your turn. Ready? Go.
Zing-a-mama, zing.
Yeah, like zing-a-mama, zing-a-mama, zing.
Zing-a-mama, zing.
Zing-a-mama, zing-a-mama, zing.
Zing-a-mama, zing.
Good. Now you're just going to do that same set of syllables on a downward sequence of 5 tones, so to go. So like this. Zing-a-mama, 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 zing. 2, try it, go.
Zing-a-mama, 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 zing.
Good, pretty good. I forgot one step. Zing-a-mama, 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 zing. Zing, zing. Try it again and go.
Zing-a-mama, 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 zing, zing.
Good. Take away the mamas and just do the zings. 1, 2, zing, go.
Zing, 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 zing.
Good. Will you take one hand and bounce a small ping pong ball on those zings? Zing, zing,
Zing, zing, zing, zing,
try it again. 2 and 3 and go.
zing, 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 zing.
Good. I don't like that gesture. Try a little dart. Turn a little dart. Zing, zing. Try it. 2 and 3 and go.
Zing, 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 zing.
Good. Now, if you're able, only if you're able, put the amamas back in. So, zing, 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 zing. But the zings are more important. 1, 2, 3, and go.
Zing-a-mama, 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 zing, zing, zing. Zing-a-mama, 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 zing, zing, zing.
Fantastic. Good. Repeat after me. Hallelujah. Ready? And go. Good. Listen again. Hallelujah. Ready? And go. Good. Then add something to it. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Ready? And go. Good. I'm going to add something else. Listen. Hallelujah. 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 I'll do it one more time since I played a wrong note in the left hand. Here it is again. Hallelujah. 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 Try it. Ready? And go. Good. Can you make every lu more emphasized? So I just want you to take a little china saucer in your hand. Take it, let me see it. China saucer in your hand. And you're going to set it gently on an imaginary table on the lu. So, hallelujah. Try it. Ready? And go. Hallelujah. 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 that single word. Try one more time. There's 3 lulus. Lulu. Ready? And go.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Good. The end is ta 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 fa mi re mi. Try it again. 1 and 2 and 3. Good. Repeat after me. No former camp counselors here, I see. Repeat after me. There you go. Rich tone with open throat.
Rich tone with open throat.
Rich tone on even breath.
Rich tone on even breath.
Good. It goes like this. Rich tone with open throat. Rich tone on even breath. Try it. Ready and go. Rich tone with open throat. Rich tone on even breath. Try it and breathe.
Rich tone with open throat. Rich tone on even breath.
As you're able, can you gently sway from side to side just a bit? Even if it's just your arms, that's fine. And see if you can take a deeper, lower breath and get kind of that gentle lilting feeling in there. Again, and breathe.
Rich tone with open throat. Rich tone on even breath.
Whiskey and go.
Rich tone with open throat. Rich tone on even breath.
Let's try it here and go.
Rich tone with open throat. Rich tone on even breath.
Good. Repeat after me as you get ready to have a seat, or if you're really tired, you can go ahead and sit. Repeat after me. Somebody's knocking at your door. Ready? Go.
Somebody's knocking at your door.
Good. Listen again. Somebody's knocking at your door. And ready? Go.
Somebody's knocking at your door.
Good. Listen again. This is the second part. Somebody's knocking at your door. Oh, oh, sinner, why don't you answer? So just listen to that second part again. Oh, oh, sinner, why don't you answer? Try it, go. Oh, sinner, why don't you answer? Somebody's knocking at your door. So it's 2 somebody knocking, 1 oh sinner, and then 1 more somebody's knocking. Try it all. Speaking in rhythm, speak in a higher part of your voice, more akin to where you'll sing this when we put notes with it in the reading session later today. Here we go, speaking the whole thing. Somebody's knocking at your door. Again.
Somebody's knocking at your door.
Oh sinner, oh, oh sinner, why don't you answer?
Somebody's knocking at your door.
Yeah, fantastic, folks. Everybody have a seat. And this is the point where I would start the first piece of repertoire. Of course, what you have probably figured out is that we already worked on parts of 2 different pieces of repertoire in that warm-up sequence, and we'll come back to talking about what we did and how we did it in just a moment. We're on the handout now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about whole part, whole general thoughts on rehearsal structure, and then we'll break down the warm-up sequence that we just experienced. In worship, if you're from a liturgical tradition, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Catholics, some Presbyterians and Methodists and others, we have this ordo, this 4-fold structure that guides our worship purposes. Regardless of the the specific details of, well, do we sing a Kyrie on this particular week, or do we sing a Gloria, or whatever. There's this four-part rubric or format that covers all. We start with gathering. The community comes together to recognize the fact that we come from all different places and times and activities to become one community in Christ that exists in that moment in worship. We hear the word, the second section. That's the proclamation of the scripture lessons, the preaching of the pastor or deacon. That's maybe the meatiest, perhaps the longest part of the worship service, depending on the preacher. It's a pastor joke. My wife's a pastor, or going to be a pastor, I can make those kind of jokes with impunity. The third portion is the meal. We gather at the table and are fed. So one is more intellectual, perhaps, the word portion. The other more experiential. Oh, great mystery and wondrous sacrament. We don't know what happens exactly in communion. All we know is that we are fed at God's table with grace and healing and love. And then we end, the shortest part of the service, the shortest part of the Ordo, is the sending. For the Catholics, it's ite missa est, out the door. That's the way it was supposed to be, because the work of worship is done, and now you go out to your work in the world, fed and nourished to serve others. So with that four-part structure, I think we have an idea for how our rehearsals might go. There's a gathering component to rehearsal. We bring our people together from whatever their jobs are, whatever they've been doing all day, and we've got to get them mentally focused, we've got to get them vocally ready, and we've got to get them spiritually prepared for what we're going to experience together in our choral rehearsal. That's our gathering right, so to speak. The word section, the heady part that's a little more work. We hear some of those texts from Isaiah or Jeremiah or whatever. They're hard. They can be difficult to process. That's where the meat of our rehearsal is. You don't want to do the hardest stuff, the stuff that's going to take the most work, right before 9 o'clock when everybody goes home. Because they're tired and they're already thinking about maybe the nightcap they're going to have when they get back to the house, or about getting kids in bed, or about the emails they have yet to answer before they can go to sleep. You want to put the bulk of your work, the hardest stuff, just far enough into rehearsal that people are really, really focused and ready to go. Then the meal. I think there needs to be something in every rehearsal that's an experience of music. That is not about details, not about getting after particular notes or particular chords or particular rhythms, but about making music together, about something like the experience of sharing a meal, of being a community. Singing something all the way through, whether it's an anthem for next Sunday or the Sunday after that they already know well and don't really need to rehearse, or maybe it's a couple of the hymns that you're going to sing in the Sunday service. They don't necessarily have to be part of the warm-up. You could do them a little bit later, just to give your folks some sort of complete musical experience. As choir directors, we often get bogged down in the fix-it mode, right? Oh, get that, get this. Give them some holistic experience, maybe right about that point in rehearsal. And then finally, send them out. How are you going to end? You don't have to do it the same way every week, but if you're working right up until the buzzer, and you're in the middle of a piece, and bye, I can't keep you any longer, that doesn't really have the sense that you planned it, that you brought things to a conclusion that was logical and that made sense. So even if I'm running out of time, I usually try to make sure with 3 to 5 minutes left in rehearsal that I stop. We have announcements, or we have prayer concerns, or perhaps at that point we sing something all the way through the end for the upcoming Sunday or whatever. If you don't know the chorister's prayer, just write down the phrase chorister's prayer, and if you Google it, you can find it. But when I worked at Westwood Lutheran Church in Minneapolis, where Ronald A. Nelson was the musician for 40 years, every choir prayed at the end of every rehearsal and before every worship service, "Bless us, O Lord, your servants who work in this place, that what we sing with our lips, we may believe in our hearts, and what we believe in our hearts may we show forth in our lives through Jesus Christ our Lord." It's called the chorister's prayer. Its English roots are in the Royal School of Church Music tradition, I believe, but it actually dates from the 4th century Latin blessing for musicians. It was a blessing in the context of the liturgy for those who worked in music, a way for the priests to bless those who served the parish by leading a song. It's just a way to think about how we might plan our rehearsals. And then on your handout are just some more nuts and bolts and realistic sort of things. Can you work 4 to 6 weeks ahead? We always think, oh, there's no way I can do it. I've got 3 things for Sunday, and Bob was missing from the bass section. Without him, the rest of them just wander off and become tenors. Can't hold it without Bob there in the center. You know what I'm talking about. There's an anchor voice is missing or something. If you do just little bits of pieces, you can easily work out 4 to 6 weeks. There's nothing that says you have to rehearse all of every piece in each rehearsal. You could teach just, for example, the rhythm of somebody's knocking at your door if you're going to sing that piece 6 weeks from now. You don't even have to pass out the music. The tricky part about this is where the word door goes, right? Somebody's knocking at your door. Little different from the way most of us probably learned it. If you teach it by rote, as a part of the warm-up, without music, your folks will have it, and then when you pass out the scores, they're not going to be confused by that. So little sections. We're teaching melodic motive. The ya, hallelujah, hallelujah, that we sang comes out of one of the first pieces we'll do in the reading session at 10:30. And it's the part that is going to catch people most by surprise because of where it falls in this particular anthem. Just teach that theme, and then come back to the piece the next week and show them where it goes. I already said that about the most detail-oriented work around the center of the rehearsal. Rehearsal plans, the longer we all do this, the better we get at it, the more we think, I don't need to write it down, I know what I have to cover. And you probably do, I do. But I know that every time I write out a rehearsal plan, the rehearsal is better than when I don't. Every single time. And I always had the problem when I was doing church choirs, we only see them once, twice a week, of not being able to remember how far we got the previous week by the time it came around to do the next rehearsal plan. So just take 5 minutes and jot yourself some notes after rehearsal ends. The soprano who wants to see you to tell you that she's going to be in the Cayman Islands for the next 3 weeks and she forgot to sign out and she's looking for mercy, she can wait 5 minutes. If your choir gets used to the fact that you go into your office, you go to your desk, or you just stay right at your music stand and take some notes quickly after rehearsal, they'll learn to adapt that and they'll give you that space, just 5-6 minutes or so. And then they'll come to you with their concerns or questions or pastoral care needs. And then here's another sort of sample rehearsal structure that I already walked you through. I think that kind of detailed thinking about what we do in rehearsal is really important. Because, of course, we spend more time in rehearsal than we spend leading our people in worship. You understand what I mean? I mean, obviously, worship leadership is the goal of what we do, the end result of what we do. But the amount of time we spend in front of them, leading them in act and worship services, is just a fraction of the time we spend preparing for those. So the preparation time, those rehearsal hours are really vital for community building, for music education, and for spiritual growth and development. Particularly if you're in a larger church, are as much a pastor to your people as the people with the collars on, because of the work that you do and because of how close the act of singing brings people to their own spirit. So what do we do in the warm-up sequence? Just a few minutes ago. I'm just going to walk you through this in order and tell you a little bit about why I do warm-ups in the Zebulon. Stretches, really, really important. Some sort of stretches. It doesn't have to be all the things that we did. You could have them do little back rubs. You could just have them sort of move in place a little bit. Again, if we're sitting all day, if we have 9 to 5 jobs that are sedentary, that are stationary, we need to move. We use our body differently when we sing. Singing is a physical activity. Then the first vocalese we did was a 5-tone scale descending from so to do on the syllable nu, o, nu. There's 3 sort of pedagogical components to that. The first is descending scales are easier to sing than ascending scales early on in a rehearsal when you're first getting your voice warmed up. You won't be fighting to get that third in tune as much if it's descending as opposed to ascending. The second thing is, N is ever so slightly easier to produce vocally than M. Say M to yourself. And try to really attend to what your folds are doing. M. And then say N. Do you feel that it's just a little less engagement of the mechanism? So N is ever so slightly easier to produce than M, which is why I don't typically use M. That's a really minor thing. If mi, me, ma, mo, mu is better for you, go for it, but that's why the N. And then start with closed vowels rather than open vowels. Everybody sounds good singing oo and e. Ooh, e. It's harder to sound good saying ah, a. Those more open vowels. So start closed, get that space in the back where you need it, and then work toward the more open vowels that are a little harder to produce. We spent more time warming up the tessitura, the middle of the range, where we're going to do most of our singing, than we did the extreme low or the extreme high. That's because we spend most of our time in that middle range. If you just do a little bit on the high end, a little bit on the low end, you'll really be pretty good. But we got to make sure that the middle is warmed up. Runners don't stretch before a marathon because they're ever going to be like this over those 26 miles, right? They stretch because they want to get those muscles to go beyond what is going to be asked of them during the race. So that's what we're really doing with the low and the high. Which is also why you should take people higher than they're going to go in the repertoire and lower than they're going to go in the repertoire as they're physically able to do it. Just to make sure that the notes you're actually going to require them to sing are going to be easier to produce. Scale patterns are the easiest thing to start with. The next easiest thing to produce are fifths or thirds. So I usually go from some sort of descending scale exercise to an ascending third exercise. Mix warm-ups that focus on various musical purposes. So ka, ki, ko is about breath and connecting breath to consonants. And it's about creating space and kind of going up into the range. It's not about vowels. You know, and you work with a choir that's used to producing good vowels. If you get after your folks about that, throwing a warm-up at them where you say, "We don't care about vowels. I don't care what they sound like." The looks of confusion on their faces that first time, they're priceless. I mean, what? But you don't care. That's not what that's for. Every exercise can have a different purpose or purposes. And that one is about working out the breath mechanism, getting high up into the range. This turning the head from side to side, I don't know how pedagogically sound that is. I think I made that up. I don't think I stole that from somebody. But it seems to me, I do this in voice lessons, if somebody, I think tenors, of tenors particularly, they're doing this thing, you know, if I just reach out, I can grab it with my tongue. You know, the high notes, they stretch. Obviously, that's not good for singing. So just a little motion from side to side. If nothing else, it's a distraction. It relaxes you so you can't tighten up here. But I do think, I've not talked to anybody who's a real, otolaryngologist or anything, but I really do think that little bit of motion can prevent you from tightening up the muscles that control and manipulate the vocal folds. Let's see. Peep and poo. That little exercise we did with the guys in falsetto. Jim Gallagher, professor emeritus at Ohio State University and director of the Ohio State Men's Glee Club for 21 years, was one of my major teachers in my undergrad life. And he did that exercise with the Men's Glee Club every rehearsal, constantly. Why? Well, we didn't ask the guys to sing in falsetto on a regular basis. But if you warm up the falsetto, if you practice getting them into that voice, you do a couple of different things with them. First of all, you get them through the passaggio, through the place where their voice breaks between chest voice and head voice. Most of them, with time, will learn how to negotiate that passaggio on their own and produce those notes more healthily and have them sound better without really being conscious of it, just by doing that exercise. Others, for whom that might still be a real problem, have just been given a tool to use to negotiate those high notes. So you've got, like, let's say a sustained F, for your guys in a piece, right? They're holding on to that note, and half of them can't do it, not in chest voice. So just tell them to sing it in falsetto. Once they know that that's a viable and a permitted vocal tool, they can do it. It doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be steady and present. So you give them another kind of tool for their toolkit on how to negotiate that part of the range. And then once I get high, I always start that exercise, and this is stolen directly from Mr. G. I always start that exercise in B flat major, so it's F, D, B flat, and then go by half step, and I always stop on B major, F sharp, D sharp, B. And they can do this. Even the oldest guys in your group can do this with enough effort. It might not succeed the very first time, but we have to give ourselves permission to fail. Grace is sort of our thing as Lutherans and as Christians overall. And then once you're up here, women as well, do that thing. It creates space. It really focuses our ear. We have to listen to each other. The guys are in head voice. The women are not, obviously. And we've got to force everyone to listen and blend. I hate that word. When you put things in a blender and you push the button, they lose all of their individual properties, right? We don't want people not to be themselves, not to sing their own voice. We just want those voices to fit together into something greater than the individual parts. But when they have to listen to each other, men singing head tone, women singing kind of right in the meat of their range, they start to do that automatically. They start to adjust and adapt so that they're making the sound more pleasant. Have them hoot like an owl, have them speak like Julia Child, all those things will get them up in that range. Kinesthetic gestures are a big deal. There's a little section of this on the second page of your handout. Every other type of musician, pianists, organists, trumpet players, flautists, violinists, cellists, have something physical that they can see and touch and manipulate, right? You know a violin section in the CSO is playing together when all the bows are going the same way at the same time and reach their peak at the same time before they move the other direction. You know they're together because you can see it. You can look at a trumpet player or a pianist and tell they're playing the wrong note because their finger's on the wrong key. Singers, we can't do that. It's all internal. We can't say, oh, well, that's not quite a C sharp. Can you just, I don't know, pull your pants up a little bit? It doesn't work like that, right? So we employ analogies, we employ imagery, we employ kinesthetic gestures to give us some sort of imaginative representation, or in the case of kinesthetic gestures, a physical representation of what we want the music to do. And there is the definition of kinesthesia for you from Merriam-Webster there on the handout. But there's a development of muscle memory that's attached to that. And you can use any number of things. Some real common ones are throwing a little dart or paper airplane. That also helps keep tempo, but it can get at a staccato or a light articulation if that's what you want. Bouncing a ping pong ball or a balloon or a feather on your hand. It doesn't matter if they're not especially coordinated. It doesn't matter if the gesture is beautiful. It just matters that they do something that gets, oh, this isn't supposed to be, marching on Washington or something. This is light, this is airy, this is beautiful. Pulling a streamer or a yarn from a ball of string. If you go like this for a legato phrase. And it's more important, if you're going to do a gesture like this, it's important that you take your dominant hand, I guess it could be either hand, and you go across your body. Because there have been some studies that have shown that when we reach over the center of our body to do things with our opposite hand, that engages the brain differently than when we just, do this. So reach over and pull a string or a streamer across for a legato line. If you're teaching a spiritual, I want Jesus to walk with me. There's a weight in that sort of song, right? It's hopeful, but it's deeply, deeply sorrowful, born out of that African-American slave experience. We don't want weight in the voice, but we want weight in the quality of the sound. So have people just step in place or walk on the heavy beats. Ask them to imagine they just had a really bad day at work and the boss was yelling, or they went home and the kids were fighting, or something. And then just have them do that so they can get the sense, something of the sense of that heaviness in their sound without putting pressure on the voice. This was another favorite of Jim Gallagher's. He would say, pretend you're spreading peanut butter on fresh bread to get a real smooth line. Or pet the kitty. Don't smack the kitty, pet the kitty. If an attack was too harsh and not gentle enough. Why fresh bread, by the way?
Because it's a terrible job.
Yeah, because it will tear if you don't do it smoothly, right? So you can ask your people sometimes to think about the analogies. They're not necessarily just throwaway things. One of the best ways to teach is to ask questions, and ask double questions. Why do you know that? Or, well, ask them the question, why warm bread? Because it will tear. Well, how do you know? Because I've torn my share of breads, or something. Tips and techniques for teaching repertoire, and we've hit on some of these already. Remember that you don't need to sing every piece in a given rehearsal. I think because we like completeness as humans, we seek closure, we seek, you don't want a square that only has 3 sides. We want things to be whole. We tend to avoid the kind of teaching techniques I was talking about a few minutes ago, where we just teach a little section of a piece. No reason to do that. You can get through 8, 10, 12 pieces easily in an hour rehearsal if you're only doing a little section of them. Just do that Alleluia from Dominic Bussaro's tempo. Just teach the rhythm of Somebody's Knocking at Your Door. Those pieces are 6 weeks out. You don't have to sing the whole thing yet. And then work on the stuff for this week and next week more intensely. You don't have to sing all of everything in a given rehearsal. Here are different approaches to teaching repertoire that will help you create some variety in your rehearsal so that you're not doing things the same way every time. Just learn the melody first, right? If the melody is going to be passed back and forth, teach everybody the tune. And don't just teach them the notes, but teach them the phrasing. Shape that melody how you want it to go. Crescendo here, a pause here, a breath here. Have everybody learn that together. Especially if when the melody comes back later, it's the same in terms of expression. They can just mirror what you've already taught. Highlight a single motive or refrain. We already talked a little bit about that. Just pick out something that comes back. Little Alleluia. A refrain that you're going to do several times throughout the piece. Teach that, and then put the piece away. Work backwards. There are some pieces where it makes really good sense, maybe something like the Gilbert M. Martin When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, which gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. If you're going to do that in the middle of your rehearsal, start with the big stuff, and then work backwards to the quieter stuff. By the way, there's no need to rehearse things they can already do well. If you've got a hymn concertato and the first stanza is in unison, and it's a tune they know, don't start at the beginning. You've just wasted 90 seconds of your precious, precious rehearsal time doing something that your people don't need to practice. Now that second stanza, that's a little scary. So spend the extra time on that. That doesn't mean, like I said before, that you don't still want to do something all the way through at some point in the rehearsal, but don't rehearse things that don't necessarily need rehearsal. Also, don't tell yourself, oh, there's 3 things in that verse, that stanza, that measure that weren't good, but I'll come back to them. And then start at the beginning and avoid coming back to them a second time. And then do the same thing. By now, you've just rehearsed those mistakes, and they're ingrained, right? So you don't want to stop every time something goes wrong. But another good reason not to just keep running things is if there are things you haven't fixed yet, you might not get to them before they've been deeply ingrained in people's brains. Ask, don't tell. Ask double questions. Ask them something about the repertoire, and then ask them how they know. All right, how should we sing? What's the appropriate style for singing the Hallelujah Chorus by Handel? What should it sound like? Give me an adjective. Anybody? Is it joyful, majestic? Say again?
Buoyant.
Buoyant. Well, I like that one a lot. I like joyful and majestic too. What would joyful, majestic, and buoyant sound like? And then sing a little bit. It's not which is very often how it comes out, right? So you might throw in a little gesture at that point. And then you might say to them, well, how do you know it's supposed to be buoyant? There's any number of answers. Well, there's a lot of fast-moving notes. It's from the Baroque era. A lot of Baroque music was influenced by dance forms. And not like, thrashing in a club or something, but sort of stately, graceful dances. Any number of answers. And processing in that way engages the cognitive side of learning and will also help the people in your choir who didn't know that learn it without you telling them or them feeling foolish because they didn't know. Well, Handel was a Baroque composer, and Baroque music had a relationship to dance forms. There's a tenor in the third row going, oh, I didn't know that. I thought Baroque music was underfunded. Attend to connecting points and transitions. There's a piece that we'll do in the second reading session today, I think, that is actually one of my pieces, and it was written for University Lutheran in East Lansing, who come to this clinic every year. And there's a place where we move from G major to E minor. And that's one of those spots where you have to rehearse that transition. You might think, oh, that's easy, because they're just down a third, and they just, well, inevitably, if that's not practiced, you might learn that first G major verse just fine, you might learn the E minor verse just fine, but the transition between the two, those two measures, can be really tricky for your folks. And that's something that I personally always have to remind myself to do. Neutral syllables, get the words out of the way, even if they're easy words. Even if you're singing Come to Jesus in whole notes. If you want those whole notes to be really pure and lovely and beautiful, just sing them on a neutral syllable. Don't sing the text. If you have tricky rhythmic patterns or long sustained singing, pulse the subdivision. That's an old Robert Shaw trick. If there's a particularly tricky spot in one part, don't let the other parts sit idle. Have them learn it too, in their own octave. Then they'll know to listen for it. And then they'll also have some fellow feeling for those poor altos who always get the leftover notes that don't make any sense when they have to try to sing them too. Slow down. We do that pretty regularly. Speed up. Particularly if you have a piece that's prone to rushing, I like to rehearse it really, really, really fast and watch it collapse. And they go, whoo, and then they don't do that again because they've experienced what happens if they let it get out of control. It goes too fast, and then it'll be easier to hold it at the tempo that you wish. Drill small sections, employ kinesthetic gestures as appropriate. We already talked about those things. Whenever possible, choose the teaching techniques you use based on the musical characteristics of the repertoire you are rehearsing. Everything we've been talking about today requires more work from you and me. And that's the challenge, especially for those of us who aren't doing church music full-time. But it's worth it. You will find that your rehearsals are so much more fulfilling for you and for your folks. Lastly, on the back of this sheet are a few resources that you might find useful if you're looking for ways to build warm-up sequences or just looking for advice about vocal technique or about rehearsal planning. The first of them is an old book by Wilhelm Amann and Frauke Hasemann at Westminster Choir College back in the day. I think they're both passed now. But this is his book called Voice Building for Choirs. I'm holding it up so you can see it. You can still find it on Amazon and other places. It's 81, so it's a little bit dated, but it has some fantastic stuff in here. And there's a little description of it. I just want to point out that it's got a whole section of warm-up exercises for special problems in specific choral works. So if you're going to do 2 or 3 Handel Messiah choruses with your choir, maybe with a combined group of church choirs for a big Advent festival or something, he's got they have warm-ups in here for Surely He Has Borne Our Griefs, for the Hallelujah Chorus, for The Lord Gave the Word, for His Yoke is Easy, designed around some of those melismas and things that are tricky. So you don't have to write the warm-ups yourself. If you have a book like this, you can just use them from here. Related to that resource is a great video by Frauke Hasemann and James Jordan called Group Vocal Technique. That's probably more of a thing for you to watch to get inspired than to show to your choirs. Sometimes people tell me, I can't do all this silly stuff with my people. They're too serious, they're Norwegians, and they just don't buy it. They will buy it if you buy it. And watching this very serious German woman, Frau Hasman, take this choir of 90 adults and do incredibly silly things with them, I mean, far beyond anything we've done here today, is really quite inspiring. You watch her and you think, if she can do that, I can do that. You can get them to buy into that. You just have to give them space to be a little bit of silly in service of the music. Ken Jennings' Sing Legato, that little exercise we did, rich tone with open throat, comes out of this book published by Chose Music. This is a collection of descriptive warm-ups. So there's one for crescendos and decrescendos. Sing a little louder in crescendo with a fuller voice. Sing a little softer in decrescendo with a lighter voice. Intervals, rich tone, staccato, marcato. The words of each little song describe what you're trying to achieve musically, which is really cool. And if you're not a great pianist, the transpositions are printed out for you in the accompaniment edition, which is this larger book. And then lastly, Paul Messheim and Weston Noble did a book called Building Beautiful Voices, published by Lorenz over in Dayton. That is a great resource, lots of good warm-ups in there, lots of good thoughts on rehearsal planning and vocal technique. It's a little more college textbook-like, but for your bookshelf, for your use, it would be worth it. And that's it. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns for the good of the cause?
Can you go back and discuss in a little more detail where you said tricky rhythmic patterns or long sustained singing, pulse, and subdivision?
Absolutely. So when you all sing a scale, a singing scale, you sing do, re, mi. Here we go, and breathe. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. Good. I don't think your thirds were in tune. I'm lying. I don't think your thirds were in tune. Will you do that again and pulse each subdivision? So you're going to go like this. Do, do, re, re. And then tap that somewhere on your body as well. Ready? Go. Do, do, re, mi, fa. Yeah, etc. So having them pulse in their voice and maybe even tap on their body, the note below the beat note. Do, re, do, re, re. Helps with breath support. It can help with tuning. In the case of a tricky rhythmic pattern, if you've got something with a lot of dots or 16th notes, having them pulse or tap. I mean, it's just the way we would learn a rhythm if we were teaching ourselves a piece, right? You might clap out the beat while you're trying to figure out what the rhythm is. You can have them do that with their voices or physically something on their bodies. Yeah, it can be a big help. Anything else? Yeah.
I liked your accompaniments to the warm-ups. What did you do? You weren't playing what we were singing, but it added to it.
I think I was just sort of filling, and not even very much, because I'm an okay pianist, but I'm not real good. Like, zing mama, zing mama, zing mama, zing mama, zing mama, zing mama, zing. So at the end, you're doing 1, 5, 1, and I just did 5, 5. Things like that, just adding a little bit of fill. In the case of the rich tone exercise, the accompaniment that I was playing is printed for you there in the book. So you can
help keep the rhythm for choirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And that's a great way to help keep the rhythm for the group and to make it musical, right? I mean, these exercises seem a little bit like eating broccoli sometimes. And if you make them a little more musical in their presentation, people might enjoy them a little bit better. Not that I've ever had anybody say to me that they hate doing warm-ups, but our goal is for everything to be musical and to be fulfilling for our folks.
If you have an hour rehearsal, what portion of that should be warm-up?
I would probably in an hour rehearsal do 5 to 7 minutes. And in an hour and a half rehearsal, I'd probably do 7 to 10 minutes. And maybe occasionally even longer. If you've got a week when the repertoire is pretty well in hand and you're not so worried about the upcoming Sunday, take a little longer time. The things you teach, I mean, that's really fertile teaching time that you can build on later. You can say, remember in our warm-ups when we did that thing with the little dart and suddenly you sang much lighter? And they'll say, yeah, we remember that. And if it worked, if it felt good, they'll remember the experience of it as well. They'll have muscle memory for it. then you can say, great, could you use that same technique here in this little section of this piece? And you've spoken maybe 25 words. You haven't rehearsed it, you've just given them an idea of something they've already experienced, and then they can build on that. So sometimes a longer rehearsal period can be really useful because it gives you more time to delve into that kind of stuff.